Good evening, everyone. It's 2 minutes after 6. Today is March 5th, and this is the Education Committee meeting. We have a couple presentations tonight and then some other business to take care of. And I see some people who are involved in one of the presentations, and that's exciting. Can't wait to hear about that. But first, are there any announcements or communications?
There is, if I may. Rarely do I take district time for personal statements, but this evening I must. This afternoon, someone with whom I have never met had a conversation about the topic of safety and security in our schools, posted on Facebook, a posting that was inaccurate and misinformed, and I must address it. My practice is not to engage about district business over Facebook. However, in this case, I will not sit quietly and be defamed on the topic of the safety and security of our children and our schools. That would be an insult to our students, faculty, and staff, to whom I am responsible every day. In addition to my natural inclination as a teacher, a school administrator, and a parent to keep all children safe, I lived the horrifying experience on December 14th, 2012, when the slaughter of children and educators occurred at Sandy Hook School, a mere 30 miles from my district at the time. I knew people at Sandy Hook. I led my community through the most difficult weekend of my professional life. Through my subsequent 2 years in Litchfield, I worked with our district and our community to ensure that school security was always first and foremost in our minds and in our practice. And I have done the same since I came to Upper Dublin in July 2014. Representatives of Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense approached Dr. Clark on October 29th, offering to facilitate a presentation regarding gun safety at Sandy Run Middle School, possibly as an agenda item for the PTO. I have met and work with and sincerely respect several representatives of that group. Following her meeting with them, Dr. Clark and I deeply discussed the request. I advised Dr. Clark that in our current national environment, providing such a program might open the door to an expectation by gun support groups for equal time in our schools. And I do not believe that our Upper Dublin community would embrace our school and our students becoming the focus of a larger political debate. Perhaps I am wrong, but that was the basis for my advice to Dr. Clark, that the offer not be accepted. And my concern has proved to be accurate. Since the murders in Parkland, Florida, and increased student activism regarding gun control, several of my colleagues in other Montgomery County districts have already been approached by gun support groups seeking equal time with their students. I want to be very clear about this. I never stated to anyone that this offer or that the topic of school safety or security is too controversial, nor would I ever do so. I do not believe there is anything controversial about school safety and security. I do believe that it is incumbent on me as a school district superintendent to ensure that everyone in our schools are safe at all times, and that we provide the protocols and processes to do so to the best of our ability, supported strongly by the Upper Dublin Police Department and the Montgomery County Office of Public Safety, and through my active advocacy as a member of the Montgomery County Superintendent's Legislative Committee and my personal advocacy with our local legislators on this topic. As stated earlier, I will not place our children or our faculty and staff in the position of being the focus of political debate at this very difficult time. It is a shame that someone felt it was acceptable to misquote me without seeking clarification that I actually said what they allege, and I have reached out to the author of that post requesting a conversation. I want to assure our community that until my retirement in July, my number one priority every day will be to keep everyone in our schools safe and secure. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wheeler. I guess because we have other topics to deal with, even though this is a serious topic, we should move on to the other topics.
I appreciate that.
The next thing that we have minutes from the February meeting. If anyone has any additions or corrections, could you please give them to Brooke? And now we're ready for our first presentation about the Spanish exchange.
Hi, good evening. I'm Senora Erickson, and Lisa Green and I sponsored the
Right into
the Spain exchange. Woo! So we have a pile of participants here who hosted Spanish exchange students in October and then went to Spain in February, just got back a week ago, and they wanted to share some of their experiences with you this evening and to thank you for your support. You can all come up at the same time. You can all come up at the same time.
Okay, hi, my name's Rebecca Klieman, and I was part of the Spanish exchange, and I was coming to thank you for your support and letting us go. We had a really good time, and it was worth it, and these pictures are the Spanish students by the Liberty Bell. The middle picture's us in their town. It's both Spanish and Americans, and then the last picture is just our group in Barcelona. So, yep, thank you so much.
Okay, yeah, all right. Hello, my name is Rachel Tilson, and I, along with my friends here, we all were in Spain last week. And in Pontevedra, which is where we stayed with our exchange families, it's in the north of Spain, and where they are situated is above Portugal, and they're on the coast, so they have a lot of wonderful seafood and stuff there. So while we were there, we got to experience a lot of interesting cuisine. And in the first photo on the left here, we're at a restaurant for lunch, and they had lots of really interesting, some like seafood-based dishes, a lot of pork-based dishes, and it was just a really great experience overall, especially because we got to experience a lot of interesting Spanish culture in the food. And for example, some of the families, we had paella, we had Spanish empanadas, and they had a lot of mussels and scallops, and it was all really, really like food that you can get here because we are in America, but it was so fresh, and it was really interesting to kind of see this different town that really like has a lot of like different influences, and it's really different than where we live, and you could see that in some of the food we ate, and it was all really wonderful. And then on the right here, we have some of the Spanish and American students out while we were exploring the city, because the city in Pontevedra, they have a lot of pedestrian area. It's a very green city, so you could walk everywhere, and everyone could go to like cafes, because there was a lot of the culture there is going out and eating with your friends. So it was really interesting to like kind of see how the different like behaviors of all the students and people our age there, and how food is really like a big central piece of it. So thank you.
Hi, that didn't work. I'm Jakob Rich, and so while we were there, we got to meet the mayor of their town, and he talked a lot about how their city, over the last few years, they've made it so that people are able to walk everywhere in the town to get anything that they need, and so driving is a lot, it's less necessary for them to drive. And while we were there, it was raining for the first 4 days almost constantly, and so he was very apologetic about that, and he was comparing himself to Paris. He was like, it only rains half as much here as there. And yeah, and I actually stood up and talked to him about how I liked the food there. He was all, oh, we can walk around here, and then I complimented him on his food, and that was fun. So we got to be. They did mention us in their newspaper, which was really cool, and we got copies of that, which was nice. And also, when they were here, we got to take them to places like D.C. and Philadelphia and lots of other places. And so while we were there, they took us. They also took us places. So they took us to Santiago de Compostela, which was the ending point of like a religious sort of walk that people would go on for hundreds of miles. And it was a huge, beautiful cathedral, and it was a really cool thing to see. And yeah.
Oh, okay. Hello, I am Matthew Breslin. I wasn't as bold as my friend Jake here. Bold enough to speak in front of an entire board in Spain, but I mostly like to keep to myself. But I still enjoyed it. We still had a good time. So I'd like to thank you guys for that. One of the first sites we went to was La Costa de la Muerte. Spain had some really interesting natural and geographic sites, and this was one of them. It was an abundant, a rocky coastline, abundant with areas where, in the old days, ships would wreck upon the coast on all the rocks. And Costa de la Muerte literally translates to the coast of death. We also saw this was my personal favorite. We saw Finisterre, which literally translates to the end of the earth, the westernmost point on the European continent. And back when the Romans were still around, they thought this was just literally the end of the world. And I guess back then, without the kind of technology we have available today, it'd be easy to see why you would think that when you just stand there, there's just nothing there. So that was really cool.
Hi, I'm Caroline Colbrenner. So after 10 days in Pontevedra, we flew to Barcelona, just the Americans, and we saw a lot of cool things. The first one, we went to Gaudi's work of La Sagrada Familia. It's a really famous church and it's still being built today, and it's expected to be done in 10 years, I think. And then on the second day, we went on a bike tour of Barcelona to see all the beautiful sights. And the pictured in the middle it's called the Arc de Triomphe. And we saw a lot of cool things there. And then the last one is La Plaza de Catalunya, which was the city in which we stayed in Barcelona. Well, Barcelona's, yeah. And once again, we want to thank the school board for supporting our trip. And we hope to see everybody again. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Tess McFadden, and to thank all of you, we brought back some Spanish lollipops.
And you found the right audience for that.
These, thank you again, school board and high school administration for supporting us. These are Chupa Chups, which are basically sucky sucks, and they were designed or came out in the 60s, and Salvador Dali designed the wrappers for them. So enjoy and thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. So chupa chupa means sucky suck. I guess it's country.
I guess so.
Thank you all. Thank you for sharing your experience with us. They've already gone. Okay.
Are they coming back in?
All right. Back to the U.S. and actually to Pennsylvania with what Pennsylvania is going to do in the future with regard to evaluating schools. And this is the Future Ready Index.
It is. Good evening. My name is Kimberly Miner. I'm the Director of Elementary Ed, and I'll be presenting this evening with Mrs. Morrison, the Director of Curriculum. So I'd like to say that we knew what Pennsylvania for sure was going to do in the future. We don't have a lot of details about what this is ultimately going to look like in terms of a product. We've been told that there will be a dashboard. To my knowledge, there has been no release of any templates of that dashboard, nor is there a timeline of when that will be released next year. However, the state has begun to tell us a few things about what this process will include, and it's related to the state's ESSA plan. So I'm going to hit play up here. Hopefully this will have sound.
Focusing on student growth, exploring career pathways, reducing the reliance on standardized testing, ensuring students graduate college and career ready, promoting multiple pathways to future success. These are just some of.
Can you go back, Kim?
I sure can.
Leveling the playing field.
Thank you.
Focusing on student growth, exploring career pathways, reducing the reliance on standardized testing, ensuring students graduate college and career ready, promoting multiple pathways to future success. These are just some of the ways the Future Ready PA Index would work to provide a more holistic measure of school success in the Commonwealth. The Future Ready PA Index, the proposed accountability tool to assess school performance, would broaden the factors used to evaluate school and student performance. Some of those factors include measuring English language acquisition among ESL students, considering how many students at a school take advanced placement courses or take advantage of dual enrollment programs, utilizing locally chosen reading assessments for select grades, meeting the needs of each student, counting the number of students who earn industry credentials before graduation, among other snapshots of student progress. The Department of Education traveled the state as it developed the Future Ready PA Index, speaking to thousands of stakeholders at more than 30 feedback sessions, from Philadelphia to Pittsburgh, Lancaster to Lehigh. Educators, employers, advocates, and others weighed in. The message we heard loud and clear: there is no single way to measure student success. PDE's mission is to ensure that all Pennsylvanians, whether children or adults, have access to a high-quality education system that prepares them for future success, whether they choose college or career. Working together, we can help all students in PA become future ready.
So that is the state's summary of the intention behind the Future Ready PA Index. To get into a few more specifics, there's going to be three primary components of this index. The first one is state assessment measures. So that's the one that we're all most familiar with, the keystones, the PSSAs, all those things that we have seen in the past. The second one is on-track measures. Those are measures that school districts will be able to have a little bit more control of and will measure student success over time. And then the third piece is college and career readiness measures, which are tied to very specific career standards as well as college indicators. So we'll go through each of those briefly. The first one is, as I mentioned, the state assessment measures. And you can see that for the most part, these are staying the same. So we will continue to be seeing reports on the percent proficient and advanced on the PSSA and the Keystone exams in the new index. We'll continue to see whether or not schools are meeting annual academic growth expectations via PVAS, which is the Pennsylvania Value Added Assessment System, which we have seen in the past. And then the new piece will be an annual academic growth expectation for students with disabilities. So we'll see that come out as a specific measure. The second piece, there are several new items on, and I want to just address briefly our intentions with the board in these measures. So school districts have the option to include readiness indicators at grade 3 in the area of reading and at grade 7 in the area of mathematics. If a school district opts not to report on these indicators, then the PSSA scores would just take over that percentage of the Future Ready Index. So we are intending to submit on-track measures in-house. We believe that they'll give us a nice opportunity to demonstrate how well our students are performing. The state was extremely specific about which measures, I shouldn't say which measures, about the criteria that measures had to meet in terms of their validity, their reliability, their ability to assess students with a variety of special education needs, and so forth. So at this point, our intention is to use the STAR assessment tool, which we have been using and reporting on regularly throughout the district, for both that grade 3 reading indicator and the grade 7 mathematics indicator. That tool meets all of the state criteria as a readiness indicator, and so we already are using that. That's an assessment that's already part of what we're doing, so we won't have to include additional testing in order to meet that indicator. So this year will be the first year that we will submit our results for the index. There's also English language proficiency. We give the WIDA assessment. That's long been a part of our requirements around English language proficiency, but it hasn't counted towards our SPP, for instance, in the past. So this will be the first time that English language proficiency will become a marker of our success as a school district. And that will be the case for all school districts. It's not an optional piece. Finally, attendance and closing the achievement gap will continue to be part of our on-track measures, and those, of course, were included in our SPP reporting. Mrs. Morrison is going to talk a little bit about the college and career measures.
Good evening. There's been increasing importance and focus on career and college standards and readiness, with the understanding that children at a younger age should begin to explore career pathways. So the state has put in some new measures into place, and I'll explain that a little more on the next slide. What we already have as part of our school performance profile, which are industry standard-based competency assessments that students take if they go to a technical high school like Eastern. Of course, we're also evaluated on our APIB college courses in terms of career pathways. It's an area we tend to do very strongly in, and our high school graduation rate, another area we do very strongly in. There's a new piece, which is a post-secondary transition to school, military, or work, and the state hasn't come out with full guidance on that, so that will be another presentation as we understand more about that. Specifically, though, when you take a look at the career readiness indicators that the state is requiring, beginning at grade 2, we are to collect artifacts, which mean actual evidence of student work, with 6 pieces of evidence for grade 5, beginning in grade 2, at least 2 per year per grade level. And that one of them would have to be part of the career work standard strand. As students transition to 6th grade, they will need to take those K5 pieces of evidence with them as part of their portfolio. And by grade 8, they're going to need an additional 6 pieces of evidence. One of the most important things that students will be doing in middle school is beginning a career portfolio. We've been having discussions around what that would look like. We're hoping to have students develop a digital portfolio that can travel with them through their senior year that students can then use in making applications to post-secondary and career programming. Additionally, one important piece of evidence that will need to be in place by grade 8 is a student individualized career plan. So as students are transitioning into high school, they have a very clear idea of some of the possibilities they have. By the end of 11th grade, we're going to need another 8 pieces of evidence that show that students are going back into their career plan, and that there are 4 different areas that students need to show competencies in, and that they'll be doing that. So we're beginning to look at that. We're beginning to look at meaningful ways students can put that into place. There are ways we do that already. this is not new for us to be doing career readiness and college planning, certainly through our guidance department. But for example, in our middle school programming, we do have financial literacy as part of our coursework in family and consumer science, and that counts as a piece for financial literacy, as one of the strands for career readiness. So how do we make this new mandate by the state meaningful for our students to help prepare them is something that's been the topic of conversation and planning. And we will continue to keep the board and community posted on our progress. And finally, questions or comments?
So, first question is there anything that any of you know that might indicate that the Future Ready Index would not start next year?
Everything we have heard is that it will start next year, but we haven't been given any details.
So my other question has to do with, I heard the words you said about career readiness and indicators of individualized career plan. What does that mean for someone who is in 5th or 8th grade?
Well, I'll speak a little bit about the elementary portion. It's certainly something that we've all been trying to learn more about, what exactly is the state's intention with that. Beginning in 3rd grade, 4th grade, and 5th grade, so 2 pieces of evidence each year, one of the things that the state has provided to us as a potential tool is an online career survey, interest survey, kind of a platform where students will go in, and there's actually like a wheel that they can spin and see which career, it will land on a particular career, and let's say it's veterinary medicine, and then it kind of goes through and shows kids what a veterinarian does and what you might have to go to school for to be a veterinarian, and it's kind of kid-friendly language, and so it's really designed to get kids to think about careers maybe beyond what they know that their parents do, or beyond what we've talked about as community helpers in kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade, like police officers and teachers and those sorts of things, so that they can have a taste of the fact that there are a multitude of careers out there and that there are certain expectations for each one.
I don't want to monopolize, but I understand career exploration and exposure to things, and the school, as part of the program, making sure that we do some of that at both elementary and middle school level. It's just that when it says individualized career plan in 8th grade, that's what I have a little more trouble with.
I'll let Mrs. Morrison talk about the career plan in 8th grade.
So the state actually offers, offers guidance on specifically what that looks like in the 4 strands. So whether it's elementary, middle, or high school, there are particular artifacts, and I'm just going to scroll through the very large document as we're all trying to figure it out. But for example, in the strand called Career Awareness and Preparation, there are specific activities that are samples. For example, create a list of personal interests and strengths and describe how they match personal career choices, beginning at the elementary school. Under the strand of career acquisitions, there are several points. One of the pieces would be engage in a role-play scenario to demonstrate what happens when messages are not clearly given and received. So some of these things are very concrete things students can do, and I believe that we're already doing in many different capacities. Career retention and advancement, I'm just reading a random artifact that is suggested. Develop a personal budget after discussing with financial institution representatives about how money is distributed in a budget. I referenced that earlier through our family and consumer science. That's something we do already, and those are important, and they're important things that we do. So pieces already exist. The 4th strand is entrepreneurship. I think that's been a topic of conversation, and we're going to look for meaningful ways to help students connect more to entrepreneurship, and I'm happy to share this document.
All right. Yeah, no, I'd be interested in looking at it. I don't want to belabor the point. It's, I mean, I understand it as evidence of career exploration rather than someone having a plan of, this is what I want to be. And, I mean, I was going to ask also, you know, what is career pathways? Is that a career and technical pathway term, or is it a term for anybody? And does it mean things like, okay, I really like STEM, or, you know, I'm a computer geek, or, you know, I'm a artistic person?
No, absolutely it is. So it's college and career readiness, and by career pathways, that includes post-secondary education as appropriate for each individual student. But what I would like to add to the conversation is there are emerging career pathways that are maybe less traditional than a four-year bachelor's degree that are emerging, and what is an exploration of that, and how can we as a high school and middle school help prepare students for things like that?
I just want to jump in with, you know, I think the state has really great intentions, and by sort of putting this expectation on school districts, it's holding us to account, right? We do a lot of this work already. How do we coordinate it intentionally? At the end, our students, we want them to have a college and career portfolio, and be more cognizant than, okay, I go to this black box called secondary education, and I'm going to come out and I'm going to start job X, right? But that they really see that there are many different paths to take, that they can be prepared and thinking about the skills they need on that journey. A lot of our students are going to be entrepreneurs. A lot of them will start their own business, and they'll start multiple businesses and leave them and transition between a lot of careers, so that they have an appreciation for what that looks like. Some of them will have parents who started their own business, but a lot of them won't, and so they don't know what that looks like. And so this puts that in place. It starts that work at a young age. It's a bit of a shock that something would be released and expected to be implemented right in the same year from the state. That's a heavy lift for a lot of districts, but you know, we have the talent here to coordinate that, put that in place.
I just wanted to clarify two pieces of this. One is that for this coming school year, the expectation is for 2 pieces of evidence from our current 5th graders, and then next year it will be all 6 pieces of evidence from our current 5th graders. The second point is that although we do many of these things in a variety of different venues in the school, in order to guarantee compliance and to show it in the index, the state has opted to do this as part of our PIMS reporting, and so it will be something that the superintendent will have to sign off on as an assurance through the PIMS process that we have in fact collected all of these pieces of evidence. So although we do many things, we're going to have to make it very quantifiable in terms of being able to report that through PIMS.
So I have a couple questions on the on-track measures, basically all relating to actually the new ones. Dr. Mighty, you had mentioned that grade 3 we are looking to do STAR over PSSA. So my question, I guess, is just going to be, what is the advantage or disadvantage of using one over the other?
So we will always be using PSSA, so that will stay. So we'll have the PSSA report using another indicator, potentially, and we don't know because we don't have the results yet, but the idea behind it is that a district can show growth by another tool instead of just the PSSA. So the PSSA takes multiple days. You know, there's a lot of stress around it. Something like the STAR assessment where we're giving it multiple times. Children are more accustomed with it. It's a shorter test. Perhaps we will see that it will show more students being proficient in ELA. And so by being able to demonstrate through another tool, and again, one that we're already using, not adding on, we're hopeful that that will show, you know, the success that we're enjoying in ELA in a way that maybe isn't always measured and tracked by the PSSA. The same would be true for the math, but the PSSA will still be a part of the report. I just want to make sure that I was clear about that.
Okay. And actually, that goes to my next question. I don't think anything was mentioned necessarily about the grade 7 that what we're going to be using, and so I was just curious as to what we would use.
We're going to use the STAR mathematics. Again, it's nationally normed. It has millions of data points. So one of the reasons we implemented, there are many reasons why we implemented STAR, but one strong reason is that we have seen PSSAs change over time. There's no guarantee that they wouldn't change again. STAR is used across the nation, has many, many data points, so it gives us a kind of static data that we're looking for to help show student growth.
All right, I'm a little unclear about the PSSAs. What part is staying and what part is going? It seems like more is being added and nothing is going, or is that?
So PSSAs and Keystone Proficiency are will continue to be a measure under strand number 1 or topic number 1. This PSSAs have been reduced in time. This year already we went to 2 days of testing in English language arts and mathematics. So I think that the Pennsylvania Department of Education and the state legislature are beginning to hear and respond to the topic of over-testing. But in terms of using the PSSA as a data, that's not going away. They are allowing, though, districts to add individual points of data. And in grade 3, the Pennsylvania Department of Education determined that would be in English language arts. Grade 3 is an important benchmark for reading. And then in grade 7, PDE determined it would be mathematics. And then from that, we could choose whether to participate and use that as an additional measure for our school district. And if we participated, how we would participate.
And to follow up with that, can you choose 1 year to the next which one you use, or once you're committed to one method, that's what we're going to be doing, so we can actually compare numbers?
I believe that the state will allow us to choose that indicator each year. There will be consistent points like the PSSA, but the indicator, at least from what we've heard so far, will be something that a school can opt into each year. For instance, if a school this year was going to use Fountas and Pinnell assessments and then got STAR as a tool the following year, I don't think that the state intends to bar a school from using that tool. So I think that it will still be in place. The PSSA in third grade, the specific reduction was they took out mode-specific writing to reduce that overall test time. So they actually took a very large and significant piece out of what had previously been part of the ELA exam.
And one more question that's totally on a different part of this. But yesterday, some of us visited the Eastern School of Technology. What component, or are you integrating any of this work that you're doing on planning with Eastern?
So there is one of the standards we have been measured on and will continue to be measured on are the industry-based tests that our Eastern students take, and that's not going away. In terms of increasing our partnership with Eastern, is that more your question? Mm-hmm. We are always partnering with Eastern and looking for opportunities for our students, and that work will continue. And if there are any, emerging possibilities with Eastern, we're very open to them.
Right. Especially, I think the sort of earlier programming on that. I mean, if you want to look at middle school, they highlighted the other day they have a summer math, or no, not summer math, summer fun, where kids get to explore a lot of the offerings at Eastern. That may be something to look at to promote that more actively, if that has a nice place in this whole
One of the things I
program.
think would be important to mention is that all of our 8th graders will be visiting Eastern this spring. For a tour and to understand more about what the offerings are there. And I am sure that the summer program will be, the students will be made aware of the summer programs, and we certainly can too. There's a list of summer program offerings that we hold through our guidance department that's given to students. And I would think Eastern would be a prominent piece of that.
Just to piggyback on that, Dr. Levin Wits, who of course is the president of the board at Eastern, and I, as a member of the superintendent's advisory group, we actually met this morning. We have been working and discussing in depth over the past few years how we can help families understand the very real benefits of that program. We have had in the past Upper Dublin High School graduates who have gone to highly competitive colleges with their credentials and their badges that they have earned at Eastern. So this year, I believe we only have 31 Upper Dublin students enrolled in the program. So I think moving forward, it's incumbent on the board to help engage in a community conversation and development of awareness of the benefits of the programs at Eastern. It's not preparing kids for the old shop floor. This is preparing students for careers that can be very rewarding financially as well as professionally. So thank you for bringing that up, Mrs. Sherpier.
I have a question about these 20 readiness indicators that we are maintaining per student. So I'm envisioning this entire industry building up around ways to store and promote this. Is this something that PDE is going to provide? Does every district have to invent it themselves? Do we think we're going to end up purchasing something to facilitate that, or does one of our existing student record systems intend to provide this for us?
That is the very important question we have been discussing, and I think we will be making some determinations, but I don't know if we are at a place of recommendation yet at all, but those are very, very good questions we've been wrestling with.
So then I guess the answer is PDE is not going to provide this.
Well, I think it's actually I think it's actually a complicated question. So PDE has that online tool that I referenced for the elementary, the Career Ladder program. They are providing a portion of that for free, which is the actual assessments. The storage of the data is an upgraded charge that you can pay to the company. And so it's interesting to me that PDE has signed on with this company where it's like you can do all of the things, but you can't store it and report it to PIMS unless you pay $295 a student. So, and that only covers like the third through eighth grade portion. So it'll be very interesting to see what people around the state do in terms of warehousing it. We, Ava and Mrs. Morrison and Mr. Vinogradov and I have had a lot of conversations about the old days where we had to keep paper portfolios in a big folder in our high school classrooms, and the nightmare that was of trying to keep all of those papers straight. So we're all being very thoughtful about how to proceed so that we don't lose any of the pieces and we don't cause a burden on the district financially.
And through the People Services budget, the counselors have looked to expand the Naviance product from grades 9 through 12. Next year, we'll be paying for grades 6 through 12.
Yeah, and so the internal conversation, right, when this came to us is, okay, we need to have an efficient, first of all, what do we already do across the board? Let's identify that, and where do we have deficiencies, and where do we have room for improvement and synergy, et cetera. The second is, how do we not have this be a burden, but an opportunity, right? So we look at, for example, the 8th grade elective fair, right, where they're taking a look at those elective choices, and how does that dovetail with examining your interest and an interest inventory. Our students already do a lot of this work through Naviance, and that's that college and career and looking ahead tool. And so how do we maybe use that as the portfolio? How do we go from what happens in elementary to pull those artifacts on the back end maybe, and then load them back in so that we're not having to put that burden on teachers, right? And looking at those. So there are a lot of moving pieces, but the first is the self-assessment. What do we already do? What tools and platforms do we already have in place? We don't want to add yet one more new thing. If we can, right, it would either be a substitution or an integration. Yeah, it's an interesting challenge.
Yeah, it feels like the hard part to me, and I'm envisioning the horrible case of a student who transfers from one district to another and has to take these things with them, but yeah.
I imagine, knowing our history of working with PDE, over time as this system evolves, there will be one or two companies that rise to the top, having honed their product to what this is, and we will be held captive to purchasing a product. But it is very important and would play quite a role. So any of our students who are looking to develop a new app, we may have discovered a gap right here for you to explore.
Just one more point on the industry around this. Because this is coming out of the Every Student Succeeds Act, which has a big focus on college and career readiness, many states are now requiring this. So there's already some players, including the one that PDE has signed on to, who are eager to corner that market.
I have one question. And with the Future Ready Index, the PVAS, or the academic growth, are those guidelines going to be changing? Are they new in any way, shape, or form?
Not that we are aware of.
So we thought this was going to be a nice short topic. I would,
Dr. Kim, I just want to add there's a new growth measure for students with disabilities, but we don't quite know yet what that's going to look like.
I mean, I still have a lot of questions. I'm not going to ask them all now. In general, I mean, I think the idea behind the Future Ready Index as a way to have what, at least when I've heard it before, is a dashboard that allows people to evaluate schools as opposed to, one bottom line number. To me, that's, in theory at least, an improvement. I mean, I guess the devil's in the details, and if this turns into like a huge unfunded mandate of collecting all kinds of things that don't really help people evaluate schools. Anyway, that was a commentary. I'm sorry.
My one concern, anytime there's a new platform for evaluation, there are going to be requirements made of school districts. My one concern is that there are requirements we're not quite ready for that we have to grow into. Yeah. We saw that with school performance profile. I'm slightly anticipating that could occur again.
Okay, moving on. Our third presentation is the special education plan that is part of the comprehensive plan.
While Dr. Sandberg and Mrs. Penner are setting up, I'll just do a brief introduction. And you think the last topic was complicated. Here we go. Special education. Dr. Wheeler, Board of School Directors, colleagues, and community. I'm very proud to share with you tonight the special education plan. It is a draft format right now because it will go out for public comment and view for the next month, and then for your approval in April. If you look at our previous special education plan, which you would find on the district website under Pupil Services Special Education, you'll note that it spans 2014 to 2017. We are now proposing a plan that's going to go from 2018 to 2021. So for those of you looking at that, you're thinking, well, there's a year missing in there. The PDE did defer all special education plan submissions by 1 year, so we're not behind or negligent. We are just following the guidelines that have been given to us. It is kind of nice because now we will, in essence, be on the same timeline as the comprehensive plan in our submission. The district comprehensive plan is due in November, and our special education plan is due in May. So this is a subset of the overall comprehensive plan, but we want to get it into your hands, into the community's hands now for that public comment and approval, so that it will then just be embedded into the comprehensive plan for that submission in November. Just a couple highlights before they get started, because I don't want to steal all of their thunder. They have a great PowerPoint prepared for you, as well as you have a PDF version of the entire plan. It's about 50-some pages, 56 pages, 52 pages. Some of the highlights. So we're looking, 4 years ago, where were we? And in our plan, it's not a plan of a summary. It is a plan of looking forward. So the next plan will go to the year 2021, but back in 2014 and where we are even right now, some of the things that are highlighting points of pride is our LRE numbers, and that means least restrictive environment, which is a mandate. We remain above the state average for inclusion 80% of the time over the course of these 4 years and plan to do so moving forward. We're well below the state average for inclusion less of 40% of the time. And probably our biggest point of pride is our out-of-district placements. In 2013-14, we were, or 2014-15, we were actually on an improvement plan by the state because we were above the state average we were at about 5.5%. We're down to 2.6 in our last reporting last year, which is a great decline in the amount of students that we are placing out of the district. Since the last special ed plan, we've built our classroom programs to K-12 that have given us life skills, K-12, it's given us autistic support, K-12, emotional support, K-12, which hadn't been there previously. We haven't really done that. We've done all of that with really minimal increase to our staffing. We increased by 1 speech therapist, 1 occupational therapist, and 3.4 FTEs as far as teaching, because we changed some of our roles and we reassigned folks. So overall, 3.4 increase, and paras 4.5. So all of the new programs, all of the bringing the students back, the expansion of supports and services to our students are all points of pride. When you go into the plan, you'll see another point of pride, again, to the out-of-district schools. There's a page that has to do with what are the schools used by the district for out-of-school placements for students with IEPs. The last plan listed 17 schools. This plan, you'll see 6. So we're, again, bringing kids back and not using many programs outside of the district. Budget. I always like to tie in the budget a little bit. It is a little over $13 million budget for special education. Most of that goes to salaries and benefits of our staff, but as far as the part that we have somewhat control over regarding students placed in other districts, our use of the Montgomery County IU plan, cost plan, etc. In 2013-14, at the end of that year, the budget that we were using within the special education line was $3,154,732. 17-18, we were at $2,037,750, and we project into 2020. We did in my 3-year projection with the business department at $1,800,000. So it's a decrease in the special ed budget by $1.3 million. That, again, with all the supports and services, and I believe much better programming for our children, lots of points of pride. So with that, I want to turn it over to the very capable hands of our 2 special education supervisors, Dr. Ian Sandberg and Mrs. Penner.
Good evening. Thank you, Ms. Clegg. Just to be clear, the presentation tonight is not 53 pages. That is the plan that Ms. Clegg was referring to, so I just wanted to relieve anyone who was concerned. Thank you for having us. Again, for those board members who I don't know already, my name is Ian Sandberg. I am the supervisor of secondary special education here. I guess I'd like to start just by saying that in the Commonwealth, all school districts are bound by the Individuals with Disabilities Education and Improvement Act, IDEIA, as well as Chapter 14 of the Code. That being said, the point of the Special Education Comprehensive Plan is to really align it with our mission that you all are very familiar with. I don't need to read it for you. The district's mission statement as well as vision. As Ms. Clegg also mentioned, this plan last year was kind of deferred for 1 year. So if there are any questions about that, we'd be happy to field them. But we began this planning process last year, and then the state, everyone who was in phase 3, as we were, was told essentially that it was deferred by 1 year. Really quick, and this should be hyperlinked, we are mandated and enjoy, Brooke, never mind, so well, I don't think I need it to make my point, but there are a number of stakeholders who are involved in this process. I apologize for that hyperlink, kicking to Ms. Evans. We have to have various stakeholders, however, and per PDE guidelines, their participation is required. The full committee met on January 5th, 2017, again planning last year for its completion last spring, and then again February 8th, 2018. PDE also provided off-site training on November 15th, 2017, which I was a part of. This committee, directly responsible for writing the plan, met various other times outside of full committee membership. In addition to the full committee, the district consulted with Ms. Joanne Parati from the Bucks County Intermediate Unit on January 29th in order to streamline procedures to be in compliance with PDE's expectations, as well as troubleshoot the common technical hurdles. And that sounds like it's no big deal, but there are quite a few technical hurdles with PDE's site. The portal that we had to access in order to do this from the back end. Again, please note just the 1-year lapse that was due to it being deferred from spring 2017 to spring 2018. The features include single district level plan instead of 6 separate plan reports. The school level data analysis portion is shared to the district level plan. The district's strategies and action steps influence the school level planning, and single site for stakeholders, district-wide to view district and all plans. And lastly, we streamline different user roles. This is what it appears like from our end. So when we're accessing this from the back end, we enter the information through these, and the committees will break apart, for instance, to enter information into each one of these strata.
So once we enter into the PDE portal, we are looking at the focus areas, and I just wanted to note that the focus areas are things that are predetermined by PDE. So we're responsible for subsections of our plan around enrollment, identification and eligibility, least restrictive environment, strengths and highlights of the district, the program profile, which includes a look at each of our teachers in each of our buildings and assigning them by fractions about how many kids they see in a specific disability category and a specific least restrictive environment. So if I have an itinerant teacher and we look at the PDE caseloads, we have to assign them strategically so that we can accommodate all of our students who need services, utilizing our resources as efficiently as possible. We look at our related services providers, both in-house and those that we have to contract. So we contract with, like Mrs. Clegg said, the Montgomery County Intermediate Unit for things like vision and hearing. We also contract with some related service providers outside of the district in the area of mental health. The ongoing training speaks to the professional development that the district facilitates. Also, we co-sponsor events with our parent associations, the Montgomery County Intermediate Unit, and Patton. These areas identified in the parentheses are also given to us by PDE, so these weren't specific topics that we felt necessarily by ourselves were important, but also are recognized by the state as important initiatives going on. Doesn't mean it's exclusive to these topics, but it should be noted that these topics are predetermined as well by PDE. So when we look at enrollment, I know that's really tiny, and I have a hyperlink to it down there if you're looking at this at a later date. You can also Google special ed data at a glance and go into PDE's website and look up any district in the state to see the same information. It gives you your enrollment. These are available every October, so the most recent information that we have is available from last school year, was posted this October, which we were all very excited to see. Not only are percentages improved as far as the number of students being serviced 80% or more outside of a special education classroom, so that means they're participating in a general education environment 80% or more of their day, and our percentage there is around 63%. We're also looking, like Michelle, she took all the good stuff, which I know nobody is surprised by, but she took all of our really good stuff. And there are students out in other settings. We really brought that number down as a district over the last 4 years, and we were, in preparing this presentation, looking over our data reports at a glance from the last 5 years, and it was really, really exciting to see the work and how it is affecting our overall data. When the data was reported, our enrollment of students with special education services was at 471. Right now we're hovering around 550. So it's definitely a lot higher. So we had a lot of conversations about why that is. A couple of the reasons that, and I will show you quick before I give you my reasons. This is a look quick at 2010 to 2017, our total number and our total number now. And then you'll see the state average on the right. The state average is slowly climbing as well. So we remain proportional, and here's a little graph that just shows that. And again, that last data point is from the data from 16-17 school year. Right now we're at about a 13.3%. So I'll scroll back to our current enrollment. So right now we're hovering around 550. Some of the factors that affect that are, one of the things our speech and language pathologists have been working on is they've been really articulating more clearly when to go from what's called an articulation therapy plan, which is not considered an IEP. It's just considered an intervention when you're monitoring a student's ability to produce certain letter sounds, and when they're going to move those students over to an IEP. So it's really seen as an intervention in the articulation therapy plan model, and then when they reach a level where they're not making the progress that they think they should be making for the norm-based, for what you're expecting at their age level, then we would move them into a speech and language IEP. So we are seeing a big shift of those students who are speech only, so they just have speech, and it previously might have been reported on an ARTIC plan and not in an IEP under Chapter 14. The other thing that we see, and as well as all the districts in Montgomery County and I think in the country right now, is just a rise in the students with significant needs in the areas of mental health. So prior to, this year and over the past couple years, students that had anxiety or students with ADHD or students that were able to make meaningful progress with just accommodations in their learning environments were given a 504 plan. So a 504 plan can give them accommodations to their learning environment, but it cannot provide them with specially designed instruction or direct instruction. We're really starting to see a shift with an increase in what kinds of services and supports these students need. And it's things that go far greater than just accommodations. Extended time, we used to give breaks, alternate locations, preferential seating, things like that under the realm of a 504. But now we're seeing these students really struggling and internalizing behaviors, and they are ending up qualifying under the disability category of other health impairments. So when you look, if I could zoom in, I guess. I don't like to, you could zoom in. Oh, it doesn't like to do it on the TV. Our other health impairments percentage of kids in special ed is significantly higher than the state average. So that's one disability category where we are above. I think we are currently around 20% of our total students with IEPs as OHI, and the state average is 14. So part of the plan is identifying those big areas of discrepancy between what we as an LEA are reporting and what the state is reporting, and within the plan you'll see a lengthier explanation of why we hypothesize those changes or those discrepancies exist. So this is another slide. So again, we talked about this in the plan, kids outside of the general ed setting, 80% or more. And while it looks like in 2010 we were a little bit higher, we were also a lot higher in that last number, which was 4.6% in other settings. So as we've brought back some of our students who previously required a very restrictive setting, we're now down to 2.6% in other settings. We are seeing a little bit of a lower number out of the 80% category, but realize that those really difficult and more complex students are now in that middle column or within the 40 to 80% range. You will notice, if you're a mathematician, that those numbers do not add up to 100. That's because there's a column in between. So we do other settings, less than 40 and greater than 80, but there's that whole 40 to 80. So if you do the math, we have about 30% of our current population that is in that 40 to 80% of the time receiving instruction in the special education classroom. This is an outline of our current staffing as of today, I believe. We have 9 AS teachers, autistic support, 4 emotional support, 3.4. If you're wondering how we split that individual into a 0.4, we have a part-time teacher. She works 16 hours a week, and she helps support some of our kiddos at Fort Washington and also goes to provide instruction for those students who receive instruction in the home or too medically fragile to attend school. So that is what the 0.4 is. And then 20 learning support teachers. Like Michelle said, we did go up an occupational therapist this year. The needs increased, the number of students receiving OT. Also, 2 of our 3 occupational therapists function in the role of assistive technology specialist, so they're running a lot of our meetings for students who need technology to access curriculum or language. We do have 6 speech and language pathologists. That went up over the last 2 years. We had 5 previously, and we're really happy to be able to have 1 designated at each of our schools, and we are still currently happy to have the supports of our 2 board-certified behavior analysts. This breaks on the left, the little box, shows you to be in compliance what the caseload caps are as far as PDE. So if you're itinerant, which is those students 80% or more, it maps out how many students our teachers can have on their caseload, down to supplemental and full-time, and we are happy to be well within that range. I'm not going to read all of these to you, but like I said, these were the topics that are identified by PDE. We also put out a parent survey at our Points of Pride meeting on May 3rd last year at the SPEAK meeting. And if Frank's here, thanks, Frank. So we co-sponsor May 3rd with Speak, which is our parent organization, and we put out a survey last May to see what the parents wanted to see more about and what we could try to gear some of our professional learning for parents toward this year. So that the list of topics up there is what we did last year, and also the last three are topics that we are presenting this year. The panel discussion with school psychologists, if you want to save the date, is April 25th, and that's here in the Media Center from 6 to 8 p.m. We also provide significant amount of training for our professional staff, whether it's in our general education curriculums, because our goal is for our teachers to first be able to support students in that curriculum, and then our replacement intervention programs, down to social skills, nonviolent crisis prevention intervention, behavior modifications, and post-secondary transition planning. And then our paraprofessionals, they have 20 hours that they're obligated to complete every year as far as professional learning to maintain their credentials, and we as a district provide that 20 hours for them in-house. They can get it through the IU and patent if they choose, but we do offer 20 hours to them on 3 separate in-service days. So these are some of the topics, and again, we survey them through My Learning Plan, which is a software program the district is using to track Act 48 and professional development. So through that, you can do surveys at the end, and the participants are asked to give feedback. So from that feedback, we drive our next year's professional learning. I think Michelle shared a lot of these. I think I can speak for Ian, maybe. And myself by saying a lot of our work, you know, we feel sometimes like we're running around and doing our work in our own buildings and our own classrooms, but some of the things I'm most excited about is my work with the curriculum department, especially this year through RTII. It's really important to look at globally at all students and how we can best support all of them, and a big piece to that is prevention and intervention. So before they get identified, how can we all pitch in and do our parts to give kids all of the chances to have those interventions before going through the process. It's a balancing act because we never like to have the perception that we're waiting to fail, and that's certainly something we hear when we're saying your kid's making great progress within the general ed class with all of these supports and sort of going that direction first. But I would say with the RTI this year and the use of STAR data, we've had really good concrete conversations around that. And then I know at the high school with the restructuring, just being able to support more students successfully in the general ed classroom with that co-teaching model has been another way that we've been able to get that number on the 80% column to continue to increase. So there's just some other strengths and highlights, and again in the 53-pager that will be posted for a month on the district website, and we also, there's copies in the back, has more detail about the strengths and highlights. I think we talked a little bit about this. These are just our next steps. So we did already submit the plan for review in our meeting with Joanne Parati from the Bucks County Intermediate Unit. Here we are today presenting to you. We'll post for 28 days on the website, and we'll be hopefully proposing for board approval at the legislative meeting on April 9th. Any questions?
Does anyone have any questions or comments?
Hi. Oh, there we go. So I will try to not ask too many questions. This is the world I live in. So if I go on, just somebody stop me. Question about just what the co-teaching looks like sort of generally in the district now that we're sort of moving more kids in and more kids into a less restrictive environment.
I can take a stab at that. I am coming from the world of special education, so co-teaching is not a special education intervention per se, and there are people here tonight who I think could probably answer that with far greater expertise than I can. What I would say in terms of the support it provides for students with IEPs is it may be the difference between a student succeeding in a D-tracked college preparatory biology class, for instance, versus being in a pull-out special education science class. So at the high school level, it really can allow just a improved ratio of adults to students. I think one of the more impressive things that this district has done with respect to co-teaching is implement it in a true, quote-unquote, true co-teaching model with fidelity. A lot of training that I am not responsible for having facilitated per se has gone into that. You can walk into a number of classes here, and it is, there's growth still to be had, but you can walk into a number of classes, as I have, and truly not know the difference, who is the quote-unquote main teacher and who is, quote-unquote the special education teacher. And part of that is that so many of the special education teachers that I personally supervise at the high school level are actually certified in that content area. So they may have a biology cert as well, which is impressive. But it really does allow that individualized attention to be spent on all students, but particularly those with IEPs who are more at risk for underperformance.
In the data that you presented, in terms of the numbers of overall students, the percentage in the district, around 11%, being a bit lower than the state average, if you could talk a little bit about the identification process for students who come under the IEPs or 504s down the road.
So this year we're excited, like I said, to have the data from STAR because it's a really clear-cut research-based intervention. So anytime a team has a concern at the elementary school level, and then I'll let you chime in, we have what's called a core team meeting. Either the teacher can bring a student to that core team meeting as a child of concern, or a parent could bring their child up as having their own concerns. And we talk about how they're performing, what their needs are, and what the data shows. Having STAR is a really nice thing for reading this year because we have every 12 weeks are having those conversations around reading and how kids are responding. So we're actually able to see in a glance every 12 weeks which students, if they're not making progress in that intensive 3-student, every day seeing a reading specialist intervention, what else is going on with them. One of the things we say all the time to teachers when we're looking at reading data is a reading intervention won't fix a behavior problem or an anxiety problem, attention and focus. So the reading intervention is great if the true reading issue is a disability in reading, but it doesn't help all of those other components. So then we have the conversation with our behavior analysts and work on doing some observations and giving the teachers interventions to try in the classroom. So we always start with interventions to see if the student will respond. From there, if after 6 to 8 weeks, 12 weeks, whatever the team feels is appropriate, if there's still an area of concern and the child isn't responding to those interventions, then we have a bigger conversation. We bring the parents back in, we review all the intervention data, and then talk about a possible referral.
I would just add on a related note, one of the things that I myself don't do but am involved in is Ms. Clegg facilitates a yearly meeting with child study teams. So she comes out to each of the child study teams and presents on the data of the jargon is hit rate. It's really an analysis of the efficiency that when a student is proposed to be evaluated, the likelihood of them coming back as identified with a disability under Chapter 14 or 15 or 16 if we're talking about gifted, but we're not. And one of the things that does is really promotes a discussion in the buildings with respect to what interventions are taking place prior to proposing an evaluation, because ideally we would like to not see psychologists spending many hours doing evaluations on students who may not be coming up as identified when we could have potentially put interventions into place that may have kind of staved off the need for the identification process to begin. And we have seen improvement with respect to that, significant. So,
on a sidebar comment, to that end, one of the things that we've been seeing some success with is getting some interventions done sort of as a classroom-based model, much earlier, much younger, but for all students, so we can catch some of the things like handwriting grip and some of those smaller things that don't necessarily need to be elevated to an IEP. So I think those kinds of efforts can help. I only have one more and then I'll stop. it really ties everything together, actually, that we've been talking about tonight. This new piece that it looks like PD is going to be looking at in terms of special education data, students around those data around those students, but also this career readiness piece and Eastern. So I'm wondering if you could just talk about, how we are supporting our students as they look forward toward the future and when they leave us, and specifically what kind of supports, but also what kind of real and authentic career training are we doing versus looking at sheltered worktops, that type of thing.
I'll take a stab at that again, just because I'm the supervisor of secondary special education. So just going back a little bit to the middle school age, when a student is to be 14 years of age during the course of their IEP for the upcoming year, so if they're 13, essentially, we are compelled to begin having that conversation about the transition portion of their IEP, which includes 3 main sections: post-secondary training, independent living skills, as well as what am I forgetting here? Post-secondary employment. Thank you. Which is to your question. As we move through high school, the level of detail paid to that section of the IEP gets greater and greater. At the high school, we are fortunate enough to have a transition coordinator, Miss Black, who is a talented individual who knows a lot, and she really serves as a liaison with Eastern, as well as researches other programs that I could certainly speak in greater detail about. She is a part of those IEP meetings, and she is really also pivotal in the discussion about CBI. So especially for students, for instance, in a life skills program, as well as some of the students on the autistic spectrum, really any student in our high school particularly, she is helping to work with those teachers, as well as forging community partnerships with, for instance, the Fort Washington Business Association, which she, along with several professionals in our high school, have just done a tremendous job in creating a network of employment opportunities. So you will see our students not only at George's, you will see them at the Jarretttown Inn, as well as dozens of other places, and really streamline that process to get them into actual pre-employment situations, and they often come out of that with real jobs. I know right now we're really working Weaver's Way and Ambler hard to get some of those opportunities in place, but those sorts of things, among others.
I'd like to follow up on this question, or in this point. Is it true that until students are age 21, the district is responsible for their transition?
Students who have an IEP are entitled to be in the system through their 21st birthday.
Okay. And then the other question is more related to the numbers. You talk about 550 students. I'm assuming that some students start in elementary school and then at some point graduate out of the special ed program. Is there then another bump, sort of middle school, high school, more in the mental health area? Or what's happening, and how do we know if some of the interventions that you're putting in place are actually working?
Great question, and I think you hit the nail on the head. I think we have an obligation under the federal law, which is referred to as child fine. So we have an obligation to fine children with disabilities, and there is that question of when a student is found eligible at the secondary level. Where is the line drawn? We certainly do not want to say, oh, we kind of came late to the game. And now there are a whole host of reasons why a student may be found eligible at the secondary level, including the fact that they may have moved into the district recently. But I think, to your point, you are seeing things, particularly at the middle school, internalizing behaviors, school phobia, and other mental health concerns that typically arise at that age level. So when you're seeing the uptick, that second bump to which you referenced, it does tend to, in my opinion, revolve around some of those behavioral issues. The second part of your question, I might ask you to repeat that just because I want to answer it on point, which was, how do we know that our interventions are efficient? And do you mean the interventions geared at
Well, especially at the elementary school with reading, I mean, it seems that that is a big emphasis. Are you graduating kids out of that after they had some special or some additional help? Do they graduate out of the special ed or IEP area? Do we know that works?
If I just so I can get clarity around your question, are they so if they are when they're graduating, do they continue to have an IEP? Is that exiting? Okay, so the number of students who are exiting special education, I don't have that data on those data on me at this time. I certainly I would be happy to come back with a number of students who exit from special education. Do you want to?
Yeah, sorry. No. So particularly, we look at student data as far as and then in that LRE category, the percentage of time they're receiving what we call replacement instruction, so time outside of the general ed, outside of Eureka, outside of ReadyGen, and before we would considering exiting, so what we start to do is titrate them back in. So start to give them some of the ReadyGen in the special ed classroom, then we push them back into the special ed, not push them, we're excited to release them, to go back in and participate in the general ed classroom and curriculum with accommodations. And until we see, once they're successful in that general ed classroom with those accommodations without the need for any specially designed instruction, then the team starts to talk about sports. I would say it's a slow process. At elementary school, very few students get exited because oftentimes they're not getting identified till third grade. We do have kids coming in from early intervention every year. I failed to mention that number's also been on the rise, so the kids that come in from preschool already with an IEP. This year we have about 32 so far, and there's always people that keep coming in through August. So when we start with 32 who are already identified, then we as a district reevaluate those 32 students coming in from preschool to determine school age eligibility. From those 32, not all of them require services in school because they might have just needed some speech and language in their early toddler and 3 and 4 year old range, but once we get them, they're no longer in need. But I would say very few students are exited from special ed in elementary school, but we do see that uptick of kids identified that have anxiety or other mental health issues at the secondary level.
Also, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I just, one thought occurred to me, which was that, and you may know this, but most students with IEPs, we are compelled to reevaluate on a triennial basis. So every 3 years, we do take the psychologist and the case manager will take another look at that student and do a comprehensive psychoeducational evaluation or a comprehensive review of records. And that usually, in my experience, is the platform from which a student might be considered to be exited from special education. Other students in other low incidence categories, if you're intellectually disabled, are reevaluated even more often every 2 years.
Also, I would just add that part of that process, the timeline, every year we sit down as a team with parents, teachers, administrators, and the data needs to support that we have met the goal from the previous year. So there's a tremendous amount of data collection that I'm certain that is happening every year to demonstrate that we are making progress. And additionally, while we may not be exiting, I suspect that we are reducing the level of intensity of supports and services over time and really trying to move toward, just having less, say, related services, things of that nature. So I suspect that's happening as well.
I just want to also add another, piece to this that I would just also want to contribute is similar to gifted education, a student would have to have an identification and demonstrate need. So oftentimes we'll have students who will matriculate through the elementary levels, and when they hit to the middle school and high school, the need for specially designed instruction or replacement instruction starts to rear its head. So it's not that necessarily we miss somebody because there may not have been a need during those early years, and then it becomes evident later in life.
Okay, if there aren't any more comments or questions, thank you very much. That was very comprehensive, and we always appreciate your statistics. So thank you. Now we're ready to move into our reports and recommendations portion of the meeting. As usual, there is an enrollment report for information purposes, but the first item that we'll be discussing is the renewal of the securely content filter. Mr. V?
So when we first switched to Securely, we signed only a one-year contract because we always want to fully kick the tires on something and evaluate it for a year. So we are going to proceed with Securely as our content filter. An opportunity comes up to pay a much higher fee for 1 year, a 3-year contract, or a 5-year contract. So we've opted for the 3-year contract. So it's a sweet spot of savings without making, in technology, you never make a commitment for 5 years. So that's that.
Any comments or questions on that? Then we will move that forward. The next is...
Sorry, I do want to make one quick, small little comment, because I can't help myself. Dr. Wheeler and I are attending a school safety symposium tomorrow, all day long at MCIU. And part of that lens is the work that we do to educate our kids on how to stay safe online, empower their parents as well. And that's part of why we adopted Securely, right? It does that piece, and we're starting to roll out the parent portal to parents, especially useful for our 5th graders, and then we're going to roll that on through middle school. Not as impactful for high school, because at that point, the students already have a supercomputer in their pocket, right, provided by parents. And so at that point, you know, you've given your kids this digital keys to the world. But it's a powerful tool for scaffolding, and those discussions are going to be at the heart of what happens tomorrow at the IU. And it's nice to have a platform in place already that has those tools, and we can begin to leverage them more strategically.
Yeah, thank you. Our next topic is summer scholars.
Our motion for Summer Scholars comes every year with dates and times, as well as the Summer Scholars brochure. Additionally, Dr. Miner is going to discuss the addition of 2 classes.
In the finance budget that I presented this year, we requested 2 additional classes for pre-K students over the summer that would be free of charge based on the outcome of our kindergarten screening. I just actually, much to my excitement, got the first packages of kindergarten screening results today, and we will be getting all of those results, going through those, identifying the students who are most in need of support prior to entering kindergarten, and inviting those students to participate in that program. This will be our first summer running it, and we're very hopeful that it will set our kindergarteners on an outstanding pathway to success when they join us in the fall.
I'm really happy about those pre-K, the class. I think that will, as you've said, help us with transitions. Does anyone have comments or questions on that?
Quick question about the Algebra 2. It says the course does not award credit or affect a student's GPA. So students who take that course, they will have Algebra 1 first, then do Algebra 2 in the summer. How does that work in terms of, I mean, then they miss the Algebra 2 credit?
Correct. So there are often students who are looking to accelerate. So they, in order to take the next level course, and that depends on their pathway, they have to show proficiency on the final that is given, and then they may take the next level course, geometry, but it's not awarded a credit. This is not for students who need an additional math credit, just students who want to accelerate.
Ava, I thought I heard you say that Dr. Miner was going to talk about 2 new courses, but
I
did
said 2 new classes. And if I said courses, I apologize.
2 sections of 1 class. Okay. I thought I
Just
zoned out or missed something.
The pre-K.
I would just say a little bit more about that. At this point, we are anticipating opening those sections with 10 students in each section, and then allowing students who move in late to have opportunities to have the same screening and potentially get additional seats if there's a need for them.
If there are no other questions, we'll move that along. Next is professional development at the secondary level.
Teachers and administrators from Sandy Run have been undertaking almost a year-long study of inquiry-based personalized learning. And as part of our learning, we are moving forward on March 12th with professional development specific to a smaller team of about 20 teachers. We apologize that this motion is coming. We'll actually have the professional development with your approval on Monday, and then it'll go to the legislative meeting. The nature of the team has been to do a lot of visitation, a lot of learning, and a lot of studying, and the team had not determined to move forward with this professional development until after February's legislative meeting. Any comments or questions on that? We'll move that forward and assume that you will be holding that anyway, and we'll approve it. Thank you, and we
after the fact.
appreciate that very much.
Now we'll move on to student activities. Mrs. Morrison, are you going to handle that too?
Yeah, student activities. Apologize. Getting some last-minute information. We have 3 student activities. We have our PMEA Region 4 Choir Festival, where we have 2 students and 1 chaperone traveling to Central Bucks. We have our Adventure Aquarium for the Fort Washington Elementary School 2nd grade team, and our Upper Dublin High School Student Government Association Leadership Training, which will take place in the Pocono Mountains on beginning June 2nd. Comments or questions on these?
I recognize that there's no cost to the district for the PMEA choir. Oh, well, no, some of it is from the Student Activities Fund, but an overnight stay for a trip to Doylestown seems surprising.
It's part of what, so it's, the PMEA takes place in different regions, and there are activities ongoing, and it's part of the experience for students to be there the entire time, and I believe it's a requirement as well.
Okay, thank you.
If nothing else, we'll move that along. Just one extra comment. I think we've streamlined the way we present student activities and the way you get the information and the request for them. So it's moved much more smoothly this year than in the past. Thank you. Conferences.
Our conferences are listed. We have 2, our environmental science teachers who are going to the Philadelphia Water Summit. Water is a very important piece of environmental science, and there are a number of speakers and activities that they'll be joining there. We have additional Wilson training for our ESL, foundations training for our ESL teacher, and then we have 2 teachers going to the FBLA Student Leadership Conference. There are a number of students going. The chaperones are dictated by board policy, and it is important with larger number of students to have more than 1 chaperone there. If you have any questions about the other conferences.
Do we need to notate that at least one of those will be a ratification, the one that's going to happen this week? I'm not sure we need to note that in any, okay. So, unless there are any other comments or questions? Mr. Robsky?
Yes, Eva, is it necessary to bring those two teachers to that FBLA conference?
Yes, it's a larger number of students, and that's dictated by board policy in terms of chaperones. Additionally, we don't want to have just one chaperone there when we have that many students.
What is the ratio?
I can provide that information as per our board policy, but we do review that before we look to add chaperones.
And I think last month we approved the student trip, right?
We did so.
Yeah.
And if I may add, the work that our students do at this leadership conference ties directly to the curriculum. It's a very important, worthwhile experience for everyone who participates.
Okay. If that's it, then we will move that item along also. Okay, that's covers all our reports. We're now up to community input. If anyone would like to address the committee.
Just seeing if Jen had anything to say, since we're the only community members here again, I think. Oh, no, Mary Ann's here. I'm sorry. Gosh. Anyway, Ginny Vitello. And one thing I just really wanted to brag and then ask a couple questions. I went to this most fascinating thing that I had no idea what I was signing my child up for, but I said, do it, because it sounds like it's something that we should do. And it's Odyssey of the Mind. And I am so grateful for a parent volunteer, Teresa Castronova, and our Sandy Run Middle School teacher, Allie Rosenstein, who's, I think, just there this year for a long-term sub. But it's a STEAM thing, competition. It was all day Saturday, all day. I mean, it was all day. Went to 8 o'clock at night. It's a cost-effective way to bring STEM and the arts into education in a caring, open, and fun environment. And it was fantastic. What that brings me to my questions is Sandy Run didn't have a great turnout there. We had 2 teams. Maple Glen is a team, and that's mostly because Teresa is a parent also at Maple Glen, so she brings a team with her kids. And we didn't really get started till January because apparently we were having a tough time kind of getting it off the ground. It's the first time it's been Sandy Run. And I just wondered if there's a problem among the district or at schools to get something like this to happen. Are we lacking volunteers? Is it hard to go through the process to get stipends or budgets? And I just don't know what the process is, because I think there's great clubs like this that I think it really was only $200 plus whatever stipend we paid for the one teacher. The parent was a volunteer. And it was really a great program, and it was a fun activity to keep the kids out of trouble after school for like 2 hours a couple times a week, and they really kind of came up with a great little project. It just had so many benefits, and I thought it was really great. And so what I wouldn't want to happen is for it to not happen again because we can't get it off the ground or we can't get a volunteer to do it. So I'm just curious about what the process is and how do we get these volunteers, how do we get teachers to want to do this. I mean, I know it's a lot of extra time for them, and I understand everyone has their own life, but I just didn't know what the process was or how we can make it streamlined or better, and I don't know who pays. Who pays for the stipend? Does that come out with our building budget, or is that something that has to get approved for the district? And that was it. And I just also want to thank Dr. Wheeler for your statements at the beginning. I appreciate your well thought out decision. It was decisive, it was clear, and it shows great leadership, so thank you.
If no one else has any comments or questions, who would like to address Dr. Wheeler?
I will be happy to do that, and if Mr. Sigafus, our HR director, feels that something needs to be added, he's invited to the podium. Briefly, 2 things happen. One is when a proposed activity is brought forward, we have a process for getting that introduced through the budget process, budget development, so we have to work about a year in arrears to get it up and running simply because it is a stipend. The stipend is paid out of our general funds, and it needs to be approved in the budget. Often activities are brought to our attention by buildings. That can happen with a petition from kids. It can happen from a teacher volunteering to do this, but there certainly is an approval process, if you will. We also then, if it's something new, for example, we already have Odyssey of the Mind, but if someone should propose something that is new and different, part of the approval process is Mr. Sigafus meeting with the bargaining unit, because we actually do have to negotiate the number of units that would be paid in that stipend, because it is part of a compensation. So it actually is a negotiated item. Is there anything else, Mr. Sigafus?
I would just add that many of our teachers do volunteer and step forward when we have a need for advisors. But even if they don't, we then look outside. So we have many advisors and coaches and so on that are members of the community that do step up to help run those activities and those programs. So it's great that we have teachers, but even if it's a great activity too, and we couldn't find anybody, we would still try to find a coach or an advisor for a club.
Yeah, Tom, before you step away from the mic, I have another question that's probably one for you.
Mr. Sigafus, do you think the volunteers are discouraged because they need to get background checks or something like that? Do you think that is like paperwork that, cuts down on volunteers?
The good thing is the legislators did help us out a little bit with that by easing up on some of the requirements. So now to get clearances, if you're a full volunteer, whether it be for a sport or an activity, those are now free. And if you lived in Pennsylvania within 10 years, you don't have to get the FBI check done. If you haven't been a resident of Pennsylvania for 10 years, that is an additional expense to get an FBI report. But by keeping the state and the child abuse background checks done, as a volunteer, those are now free of charge when people wish to step up and volunteer.
I'm curious, so Odyssey of the Mind, for example, my daughter participated in Odyssey of the Mind, but it wasn't through the school last year when she participated, right, Dr. Clark? That was so clubs like that can be independent or can be through a school. If someone wants to bring it into the school, and there's a reasonable opportunity to say, well, we don't think that's a school thing. That's a great thing for the community to do, but it's not. How does that approval process? Is it because the teacher wants to do it, or is it because we are actively pushing for a teacher to do it? How does that come about?
Well, there are several things that can happen. Again, we tend to find that our teachers like to step forward and engage in working with our students. We have an example this year of, I believe it is our debate club at Sandy Run, where members of our Chinese community stepped forward and offered a stipend for us to run a trial club. And we did that for 1 year, and then we are going to assume that into our budget for next year so that it is an established activity. So it doesn't always come internally, but there always is negotiation. There is a process. We're not going to be able to entertain groups just spontaneously arriving and being recognized by the district. So there is a process.
Yeah, and I would add that, especially at the secondary level, very often students will generate a list of, students that are interested in doing an activity, but that also can come from teachers or administrators at the building level. At the elementary level, we have wonderful PTO organizations or PTA organizations as well that will sometimes come up with activities that we would like to do. Some of those become more of our formal program, or I know some of our PTOs or PTAs do, after school activities which are a little bit separate. But occasionally you see a little bit of a crossover between what might start as a PTO or PTA activity becoming more of a school embrace type of club or formal activity. But those are usually the ways that new clubs or activities come to our attention for approval.
Dr. Clark?
May I add a little clarification?
Only because you probably don't have the paperwork in front of you, Tom. Michelle Sirota, actually 3 years ago, when she was a member of our PTO board, brought Odyssey of the Mind forward. So we did vet it through the budgeting process, and it is a paid sponsorship. Right now, Gary Height was our sponsor. This year he stepped down, so it took us a few months into the school year for us to find Miss Allie Rosenstein to step up as the sponsor. So she is a long-term sub. Her employment with the district is to be determined. So if indeed she does not return to Sandy Run in the fall, we will most certainly look throughout the summer for someone to assume that sponsorship, because I agree, it is an awesome, awesome opportunity for children.
Thank you.
And I just want to add on, in that holistic growth that happens from, the interest is expressed, it's a parent, it's a teacher, it's a something, and it starts off as a club, maybe it's a PTO activity, et cetera. And what's great is that when it eventually, like Odyssey of the Mind, becomes something that we take on as a district, that we put into our budget, that we want to sustain, it no longer becomes dependent on a personality to sustain it. So that someone like Gary Height can step away, but we, as an institution, have an obligation to a program that we value. And so, this year we scrambled to find somebody, but we already know now at this point that we want to find someone to carry that forward. And so that's the value when you cross over into, yes, this is part of our program now that we want to sustain.
Thank you. I think, seeing no other comments, that concludes our meeting. Our next Education Committee meeting is Monday, April 2nd.
Joan, Stan has
one more.
Yeah, just this Saturday at 7 p.m., there's Monte Carlo night at Fort Washington.
Oh, right. Don't forget Monte Carlo night. Hope to see everybody there. And then we'll see you at the next Education Committee meeting, Monday, April 2nd. Good night.